But once there was a man named Thomas who lived alone in a small cabin in the woods. Thomas was a hunter, and he spent most of his days hunting for food in the forest. One day, while he was on a hunt, he stumbled upon a small, injured cat. Thomas couldn't just leave the cat there, so he decided to take it back to his cabin and nurse it back to health. As the days went by, Thomas and the cat grew very close. The cat would follow him around everywhere he went, and would even curl up next to him at night. Thomas had never been much of a pet person, but he found himself becoming very attached to the cat. One day, Thomas came back from a hunt to find that his cabin had been ransacked. His belongings were scattered all over the floor, and there was blood everywhere. Thomas was horrified to find that his beloved cat was lying dead in the middle of the room, its body torn apart by whatever had attacked it. Filled with rage and grief, Thomas set out to find the creature that had killed his cat. He tracked it through the woods for days, surviving on nothing but his own anger and determination. Finally, he came upon a clearing where he saw a pack of wolves feasting on the carcass of a deer. Without thinking, Thomas charged at the wolves, brandishing his hunting knife. The wolves were caught off guard and scattered, but not before one of them lunged at Thomas and savagely attacked him. Thomas fought back with all his might, but the wolf was too strong and too fast. In the end, Thomas lay on the ground, bleeding and broken, with the wolf poised to deliver the killing blow. But just then, the cat's spirit appeared before him, and with a fierce yowl, it attacked the wolf with a spectral fury that Thomas had never seen before. The wolf was no match for the cat's ghostly form, and it soon fled back into the woods, leaving Thomas alone with the cat's spirit. The cat looked up at Thomas with its ghostly eyes, and then vanished into the ether, leaving Thomas alone to contemplate the price of revenge. As Thomas lay on the ground, his wounds bleeding profusely, he could feel the cat's spirit fading away. But just before it disappeared completely, he saw a strange glow emanating from its body. And then, to his horror, the cat's body twitched and convulsed, as if coming back to life. But this was no ordinary resurrection. As the cat rose to its feet, Thomas could see that its eyes had turned a blood-red color, and its fur had taken a sickly, grayish hue. The cat lunged at Thomas with a ferocity that he had never seen before, and he knew in that moment that something was terribly wrong. As the days went by, Thomas began to notice strange behavior in the other cats that roamed the woods around his cabin. They seemed to be drawn to the zombie cat, and they would gather around it, hissing and growling. And soon, one by one, they too began to turn into zombie cats, with glowing red eyes and sickly gray fur. Thomas tried to keep his distance, but it wasn't long before the zombie cats started to come after him. They would catch and bite at his cabin door, trying to get in and infect him too. It seemed that the zombie cat had somehow infected them all, spreading its undead curse throughout the forest. Thomas knew that he had to do something before the zombie cat so overwhelmed him completely. He spent long hours trying to find a way to reverse the curse, but nothing seemed to work. And so, in desperation, he took up his hunting knife and set out to destroy the zombie cat once and for all. It was a dangerous mission, and Thomas knew that he might not make it out alive, but he had no other choice. He stalked the zombie cat through the woods, his heart racing with every step, and finally, he caught up to it, just as it was about to infect another innocent cat. With a swift blow of his knife, Thomas plunged it into the zombie cat's heart. The cat let out a terrible shriek, and then collapsed to the ground, its undead curse broken forever. Thomas returned to his cabin, exhausted and relieved. He knew that he had saved himself and the other cats from a terrible fate. But as he lay down to rest, he couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lurked in the woods, waiting to prey upon the unwary. As Thomas stood over the lifeless body of the zombie cat, he suddenly felt a strange sensation coursing through his veins. His body convulsed, and he let out a blood-curdling scream. And then, to his horror, he began to transform. His limbs elongated, His skin turned a sickly gray and fur sprouted all over his body. Within moments, Thomas had transformed into a monstrous, half-human, half-cat creature. He tried to fight the transformation, but it was too late. The zombie cat's curse had infected him, and there was no going back. Thomas was now a freak, an abomination, a creature that could never again be accepted in society. With no other options, Thomas fled to the city, hoping to find some place where he could hide from the world. But it wasn't long before he was discovered by the owners of a freak show circus. They saw him as a cash cow, a creature they could exploit for their own profit. And so, Thomas was put on display as the human cat. People came from all over to see him, to gawk at him, to throw peanuts at him. He was a freak, a spectacle, a thing to be laughed at and ridiculed. But Thomas didn't care. He was too consumed by his own misery, too lost in his own despair. And then, one day, it happened. As Thomas was being transported to a new location, a car plowed into the truck carrying him, sending him flying through the air. He landed the pavement, his body broken and twisted. But then, to everyone's horror, he began to move again. Thomas had become a zombie human cat, and he was now infecting everyone he came into contact with. It started with the circus workers, but soon spread to the audience, and then to the entire city. Within weeks, the world was in chaos. People were turning into zombie cats left and right, and there was no cure in sight. The once quiet forest where Thomas had lived was now a wasteland, overrun by hordes of zombie cats. And in the center of it all stood Thomas, the original carrier of the virus, transformed into the very thing that he had once fought against. He was a monster, a freak, a harbinger of the end of the world. And as he surveyed the destruction that he had wrought, Thomas let out a terrible, mournful howl, a sound that echoed across the desolate landscape, a sound that signaled the end of an era and the beginning of a new, terrifying world.